describing antiderivatives or indefinite integrals of a given function. I want to get a little bit more in-depth to how to take the antiderivative of different trig functions today. So the antiderivative is just the reverse or opposite of the derivative. If you can take the derivative, you can take an antiderivative. It's just the exact opposite. Let's review some of these derivatives of trig functions. I've got the derivative of the 6 trig functions up on the board. Sine, cosine, tangent, secant, cosecant, cotangent. What's the derivative of sine x? Cosine x. What's the derivative of cosine x? Negative sine x. Remember, the cos go negative. All these co-functions, cosine, cotangent, cosecant, have negative derivatives. You can reference all of this off your formula sheet too. I think it's in the middle of the top portion on your formula sheet as you're looking at some of these given derivatives that we've used from first semester. What's the derivative of tangent x? Secant squared x. Cotangent x is very similar, but it's a co-function derivative. So it would be negative cosecant squared x. Remember the derivative of secant x? Secant times tangent, secant x, tangent x. Cosecant x is the negative co-function, so negative cosecant x, cotangent x. Kind of putting those back in your head from first semester. There it is. I'll reference these back on your formula sheets. What is that on the top half? Line number 13 through 18. Kind of these two rows here. 13, and the next row is 16 through 18. All right, so the antiderivative is just the reverse. If the derivative of sine is cosine, what's the indefinite integral or antiderivative of cosine x dx? What function has a derivative of cosine? Sine x plus c. If the derivative of sine is cosine, then the antiderivative of cosine has to be sine. Does that sound right? Okay, let's practice more. The derivative of cosine is negative sine x. So what is the antiderivative or indefinite integral of sine x dx? Negative cosine x. The derivative of cosine is negative sine, so I stick a negative out in front to make the derivative of negative cosine x back to positive sine x. The derivative of tangent x is secant squared x. So what is the antiderivative of secant squared x? Don't think too hard, it's kind of up on the board. It's got to be tangent. Tangent x plus c. See, working through these first three, the top half, we should have these given on the integration formulas on your formula sheet. Let's see here, line number 6 is the antiderivative of sine. Line number 7 is the antiderivative of cosine. Let's see, we did the antiderivative of secant squared. That would be line number 12 on your formula sheet. The derivative of cotangent is negative cosecant squared x. So what is the antiderivative of cosecant squared x dx? Negative what, Kim?
Negative cotangent.
Yeah, you just slide the negative over here. It's negative cotangent x. The derivative of secant is secant x tangent x. So if I just reverse it and take the antiderivative of secant x tangent x dx, It should be secant x plus c. What function has the derivative of secant tangent? That should be secant x plus any constant c. Let's see, let's make the last one here. Derivative of cosecant is negative cosecant cotangent. So the antiderivative of cosecant x, cotangent x dx equals what? Careful with the negative. Gotta be negative cosecant, right? What is the derivative of cosecant x? It'd be negative cosecant x cotangent x, but I want it to be positive cosecant x cotangent x, so I put the negative out in front so that the signs line up right. See, those bottom three should also be on your formula sheet. The antiderivative of cosecant squared dx would be line number 13. The antiderivative of secant x tangent x dx would be line number 14. And then the last one, the antiderivative of cosecant x cotangent x dx is line number 15. Sometimes I remember to look at the formula sheets, and sometimes I just think about it as I know the derivatives, so the antiderivatives are just reversing it. Let's just put a couple of these into application here. The biggest mistake people make is switching up negatives. Watch your signs as you're doing some of these here. Okay. Let's just try a couple here real quick. Make sure we understand trig functions and their given antiderivatives. The antiderivative or indefinite integral of cosecant squared theta minus sine theta d theta. What is the antiderivative term by term? What's the antiderivative of cosecant squared? Notes are on the board, or you can look on your own formula sheet. Excuse me. Say again, Luke? Yeah, negative cotangent x. Or in our terms, it's in terms of theta. Negative cotangent theta. All right, next up, minus the antiderivative of sine theta, d theta. I know the antiderivative of sine is negative cosine. What would the antiderivative of negative sine be? Careful with the negatives. If positive sine, antiderivative is negative cosine. What's the antiderivative of negative sine theta? Positive, you just have to flip the signs. Once again, how can you always check your work? Plus C, what am I doing here? Plus C. How can you always check your work? Take the derivative. Derivative of cotangent will be negative cosecant squared. I extra have the negative out in front. Now it's positive cosecant squared, so that checks out front. What is the derivative of, this should be cosine, what am I doing here? What's the derivative of cosine? Cosine theta, derivative would be what? Not positive sine, Caleb. Negative sine. Derivative of cosine is negative sine, so that should check off. Let's try one more. 10x minus secant x tangent x. Try this one, please. Take a second, write down the antiderivative. What is the antiderivative or indefinite integral of 10x plus secant x tangent x dx? My turn. Take the antiderivative of 10x and the antiderivative of secant x tangent x. Lily, how'd you do 10x? What's the antiderivative of 10x? 5x squared, good. The derivative of 5x squared makes 10x, so the antiderivative of 10x has to be 5x squared. What is the antiderivative of secant x tangent x? Secant x. Don't forget what on the end? Plus that c. All right, so let's grab our laptops and we'll pull up that same practice document from yesterday.